What's going on, everybody? We're back looking at Italy versus Wales in their last match in Group A. Wales and Italy will advance in the next round, and let's get into the tactical breakdown on how each team played and what we can expect in the round of 16, semifinals, and finals if they make it that far. Before we start, my book's out, it's on Amazon. Check it out, and I'm making this video using Keyframe, so be sure to check Keyframe out as well. But let's get right into it. Wales, they went with their back five in the defensive phase, which would then turn into a three-man build-up when they would transition offensively. Then they would go with two holding midfielders, but the right holding midfielder would jump to then gain access to one of the Italian holding midfielders. So this would limit the double pivot of Italy on the ball in their first third, and although it increased space between the lines, Wales would have greater access to their players who usually deliver the balls into these dangerous areas. So this left Wales a little bit thin in the holding midfield area, with a lot of times just having the off-centered left holding midfielder covering the space between the lines. But this tasked Wales' front three with high emphasis on using their cover shadows to block spaces between the lines and into the half space. Then Italy, in their offensive phase, they went with a three-man build-up using their goalkeeper initially to create this three-man. They used dual width on the right-hand side, starting to see a little asymmetry with the left-hand side going with the single width. This allowed Italy to then have two players in the advanced half spaces and their lone forward. And what Italy did really well in this match was using vertical rotations and vertical interchanges, changing the height and depth of their players, especially these five players, between the Wales' defensive structure, and by varying their positioning, this gave them a lot of fluidity. Now, the dual width created on this side here would then turn into single width, and the right fullback would become most of the time a right central defender in the midfield third. As we see the right fullback starting to go a little bit narrow, not quite a third center back in this situation, still moving slightly into the midfield third, but starting this asymmetry with their back line. But Italy showed versatility to be able to build with four or three most of the time. At some phase in the build-up, at some stage in the build-up, this right defender would join the other two and create a three-man build-up, which gives them more flexibility and security in their initial build-up. They go with their two holding midfielders, with Marco Verratti joining the team, gave them a little more mobility going forward. That's where the interchanges came from, and the ability for more advanced players to play in deeper roles and deeper players to play in more advanced roles. Wales in the midfield third played their 5-2-3, but oftentimes it looked like a 5-1-4, with their holding midfielder, as we said, jumping into the first line of pressure to gain access to the Italian holding midfielder in the first line. So by doing this, the player jumped, vacating the space between the lines, which gave Italy an opportunity to play through, but because of their use of cover shadows, Italy was limited in using this space in any dangerous way, which then worked out for Wales for most of the game. The other holding midfielder of Italy was covered by the central forward's cover shadow, with then cover from the deepest holding midfielder. Now we start to see the three-man back line, as we said we would, in the build-up, with now single width on either wing of Italy, and then now going higher up the field, we start to see more depth from the wingers dropping between the lines and trying to create dangerous passing options. And this was often due to the Wales over compactness as they got deeper. So when the lines decreased, the right holding midfielder dropped back alongside his partner. We often saw the wingers of Italy or offensive wide midfielders drop just outside of the double pivot, trying to stretch them and test their defense in multiple ways. Now in the second half, there was a red card. After the red card, Wales switched over to a 4-4-1, and they looked to just solidify things, not concede any more goals. They were pretty dangerous on set pieces when Keyframe came in, gave them an extra dynamic, which I think is going to be huge for them. So when they went down to 10 men, they just tried to solidify themselves defensively and get something on a set piece. But what Italy did, they also solidified themselves by playing their holding midfielders a little bit more towards the half space, giving them more players behind the ball, which let their central defender, an asymmetric fullback, wider to create routes of progression outside of the Wales defensive block. Now players pinning between the lines, pinning the back four were 3 players, forcing Wales to stay very narrow, but the Italian shape elicited progression outside of the Wales block and around the Wales block by staying very wide, but at all times occupying the space between the lines, forcing Wales to stay very narrow. Now for the Wales build-up shape, they went with an interesting build-up shape here with a 4-man diamond being created by a jumping central defender and a false 9. So what this did was it allowed the wingbacks to occupy the wide areas and then the 2 forwards to try and pin the back 4. And this worked pretty well, but they could not establish numerical superiority against the Italian 4-3-3 in the defensive phase. So as we highlighted, the 4-3-3 of Italy looked to match up man for man against Wales midfield and the false 9, and the central forward for Italy would then take away the jumping center back or the pivot with his cover shadow. Now moving into the midfield third, we have Wales in possession with their back 3. They had a very fluid front 3 with wingers coming narrow and varying their height, with Gareth Bale playing in the half space and Daniel James as well varying his height with the other 3 midfielders, sometimes coming between the lines to then make runs through the half space, but more often than not holding the width. So Wales looked less of a positional structure with more fluidity, with Aaron Ramsey dropping into different areas, but the defensive lineup of Italy wasn't really tested too much from the Wales possession, as they went with a 4-5-1, which gave them a lot of spatial control between the lines and limited the dangerous space Wales had access to. So as we see here, only Gareth Bale is the player between the lines, and players were reluctant to then enter these positions because of the low amount of space, which required them to then play with dual width on one side and then single width on the other, with a lot of players in the platform area struggling to get into dangerous spaces. And that's the analysis, everybody. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next one.